All right. Happy Friday, everyone. What a great way to end the week.
It is
My
week
goodness.
to week. What a life
Yes.
we're all living. What
It's,
a
I
life.
know. Wonderful.
it's wonderful to see people joining us.
My lofty thoughts, of course, dwell on things like hair dye.
It's-
That's what this crisis is. Partly of what it was done.
You and so many others, Ken, so many others, many who will relate on the call. Welcome, everyone, Zooming in with us today. So glad to have you along. We are also live on YouTube, so tell your friends and your families. And we're going to wait just a few minutes, not a few minutes, but a minute to get a few more people in the Zoom room with us before we launch entirely. We got a goodly amount of people. I'm going to stop my video to get on the bottom, folks. I'll be right back. Okay. How are we, Perry? Great. Greetings all. Welcome to this McCarter at Home event. McCarter at Home is McCarter Theater Center's virtual programming from Princeton, New Jersey in the US. And our goal is to bridge the isolation gap and be a source of light and human connection during these times as we all do our part to flatten the curve. My name is Paula Alexson, and I am McCarter's Artistic Engagement Manager, and it's my great pleasure to moderate the McCarter Live in Conversation series. This is the second installment of McCarter Live in Conversation, and it is both a privilege and an utter delight to be here virtually with special guest, internationally acclaimed playwright and author Ken Ludwig, and McCarter Artistic Director and resident playwright Emily Mann. Ken, Emily, so good to see you both.
Oh, it's good to be here, Paula. Thank you.
What a treat. What a treat.
Aw.
I'm just thrilled.
So you should know that today's attending audience is local, regional, national, from the North, the South, the Midwest, and the West Coast. And there are a number of folks Zooming in from Europe. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. So we just say greetings to you all, you YouTube viewers, and thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Hey, Ken, there's a David Ludwig joining us from California. Any relation?
I think that's my nephew. Hey, David.
Any other Ludwigs?
There should be an Olivia Ludwig, my daughter, coming on, but
Olivia, I hope you're with us. Great to have you. I also want to do a personal shout out to my sister, Denise. She's attending from New England. Hello, sister. And also Zooming with us are members of McCarter's Community Shakespeare Reading Group. Huzzah, dear friends. And we also have some of our wonderful students currently enrolled in McCarter's Shakespeare Kids Reading Group pilot project. They are an ensemble of intrepid and so enthusiastic 5th through 8th graders who are exploring the play Midsummer Night's Dream. And they are incidentally preparing monologues for next week's Midsummer Monologue Throwdown. So Ken, they will definitely benefit from their experience with you today. So hey, Anjali, Ava, Alex, and Conrad, and if I'm leaving any students also in the room out, I apologize. So Ken and Emily, I thought we might start the conversation today with you with a quarantine sort of current moment check-in. From where are you Zooming in? With whom are you quarantined? How is it going for you? And what has your day-to-day experience been?
Ken, do you want to start?
Sure. My experience in the quarantine, I mean, it's such a bizarre experience for all of us. It's surreal. But because I'm a writer and I spend most days when in normal life in my study, scribbling away and writing, it probably has not affected me nearly as much as it has other people on this broadcast. So much of my day is spent in my study writing. I'm sheltered in my house with my family. Getting groceries is a challenge, and keeping up with the news. I try to keep up with it, but I get so tired of watching the same shows on television that I can't. I'm not sure I'm doing it. I do it through the print editions of the New York Times and the Washington Post. I'm in Washington, D.C., where I live.
Oh, thanks, Ken. Ken, it's beautiful. It's like so picturesque. Your backdrop, it's real, correct?
It is real. No, that is not a picture.
How about you, Emily?
Well, I'm having a similar situation as Ken. I'm sheltering at home in Princeton with my husband and having a certain amount of trouble with getting enough food into the house. We seem to be eating an enormous amount, and it was just the two of us, and it's suddenly 3 meals a day at home. So that's all new for us, and I'm learning how to cook again. Oddly, because I'm stepping down from McCarter on June 30th, I had been splitting my time between my writing on, whenever I was not hard at work directing or producing at McCarter, finding it in the interstices of my life. And now this is an oddly interesting transition because I have to be home. I'm not commuting. I'm not running into New York. I'm finding a lot more time at home, and just last night finished the first draft of the new musical, the new book to the musical I'm writing with Lucy Simon.
Ooh.
So I'm finding that I'm
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a huge, for those of you who are writers, a first draft is huge. So I've been able to find a way through the loss and the grief and the being so stunned and frightened by what's going on to finding a way at least a few hours a day to just write. And that's been a great blessing. So
it is a blessing. Yeah.
Hopefully maybe we could get Lucy on to talk in conversation with you. Ken, beyond the personal and domestic, I wonder if you could share how the shutdown has beyond you're sitting, you're writing, but you're doing other professional activities. We sort of had this pre-show conversation about all the Zoom meetings you're attending. You have upcoming events?
I do. The next one is next Wednesday. I was asked to speak for an hour on Emma, Jane Austen's Emma. I'm a big, as much as I'm a Shakespeare geek, I'm sort of a Jane Austen geek, and I speak about her a lot. And we're going to focus, because there's been the new movie, and it's for the wonderful Sarah Mackenzie. She has something called the Read Aloud Revival. That's the name of her organization, which is, I think, the biggest homeschool network in the United States. And the people who normally homeschool, and now everybody else is homeschooling. It's going to be a way to look into Emma, talk about it, and then share it with your kids.
That's great. Oh, Ken, if you would share information on that with me, and if there are any folks who are attending that are interested in learning more about how to get into that call, if you write us at askus@mccarter.org, I will make sure to get that information to you.
Great.
So you
Thanks.
can attend that. So that would be great.
Thanks.
Let me just say a few words about you, Ken. You are a Tony and Olivier award-winning playwright. You've written 28 plays and musicals, including 6 shows on Broadway and 7 in the West End. Your work has been performed in over 30 countries in more than 20 languages. Your best-known works include Lend Me a Tenor and Crazy for You, which ran for 5 years on Broadway and won the Tony and Olivier Awards for Best Musical. You've worked with amazing actors, Alec Baldwin, Carol Burnett, Tony Shalhoub, Lynn Redgrave, Joan Collins, and Robert Goulet. You've received numerous awards, including the Edgar Award for Best Mystery of the Year and the Edwin Forrest Award for Services to the American Theater. And your plays are performed somewhere in the United States every night of the year, except
now.
Yeah.
And this leads to my next question, sort of my final like COVID question before we dive into our focus today. If we escape into our focus today is, and this actually comes from a caller zooming in, Shannon Cameron. She's the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Paramount School of Arts in Aurora, Illinois. She's also a past McCarter intern and had been a directing assistant to Emily. She asks if you both might share your thoughts on what theater might look like after this pandemic.
Interesting.
Oh, she was always a smart one. Well, I do not have a crystal ball. If you have thoughts, I'd love to hear it. On my good days, when I think in the next year and a half or 2 years, we're really got the vaccine, we've got this under control, people are going to be so hungry to get back into a theater. They're going to be storming the gates to want to sit shoulder to shoulder and watch something live again. Until then, I think, theater people always need to create. And so we do it with whatever's at hand. I find it interesting learning a lot on these virtual platforms, both what we can do and what we can't do. And there really is no substitute in my mind to all being together to create it, and then all being together to receive it once you've created it. But perhaps we're going to learn some new techniques about how to reach out. I'm loving that we're able to connect today in Europe and in Illinois and on the West Coast and in Princeton itself, that we'll be able to find a way to learn from the obstacles put in our path now. And it may start to become a more hybrid form in a healthy way. I'm not sure, or it'll go the other way. And we'll get to the absolute essential of what it means to make theater, which means live. And all you really need, as Shakespeare knew, were the actors, the story, and the playwright. And an audience.
I think that's great. I think that's just great. I've been thinking about how this might affect playwriting and what the content of what people are going to write after this crisis is over. And it seems to me that it will change how we write in one way and maybe not in another. That is, the crisis itself. I have one of my favorite quotes here is from Yeats. It says, "Out of our quarrels with other people, we make rhetoric, but out of our quarrels with ourselves, we make literature." It's like the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. And what's interesting about the crisis, it seems to me, is that we're of one mind about the crisis. We're not in conflict with ourselves about the crisis. We have a common enemy, and it has pulled us together. So I don't think anybody's going to be writing plays about the crisis as enemy and having two, of course, as enemy, but having two minds about it. We'll all feel the same. And to the extent future movies or future works of art are about this crisis, which they will be, there'll be melodramas. But I think the future of how we write about how we dealt with this crisis, how we internalized the crisis as human beings and fought with ourselves about how to present it to children, what it meant for ourselves long term, what it meant about heaven and hell and our souls. That's where the drama will come out of this crisis.
This is a great place to segue to Shakespeare. who also must have contemplated what theater might look like every time the theaters closed due to plague. Emily and Ken, I don't know, have you ever read James Shapiro's 1606, William Shakespeare in the Year of Lear?
I have.
Yeah.
I have not, but I
just
have it
ordered
and I
my
want
copy
to.
today.
Yeah.
The reprint title is The Year of Lear, Shakespeare in 1606. I ordered my copy through our community partner who's working with us on this event, Ken, Labyrinth Books in Princeton. You can, again, look for the book under the title, The Year of Lear. It's the winner of the Samuel Johnson Book Prize, and it chronicles Shakespeare's most creative year, a year blighted by plague and political conspiracy. It was the gunpowder plot year. And during that time, he wrote King Lear, Macbeth, and Antony and Cleopatra. So I've ordered it, and my hope is that we'll be reading King Lear very soon. Ken, the first virtual event that McCarter offered was an online meetup of our monthly gathering of the Shakespeare Community Reading Group. With the theater closed and Emily and our managing director, Mike Rosenberg, captive in their respective homes, I was able to recruit them for our reading of Macbeth. And after the event, Ken, Emily and I talked about the joy of reading Shakespeare aloud. And of course, you came up in conversation because of your wonderful book, How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare. And it occurred to us that in this time of distance and home learning and families being sort of hunkered down together inside and passing the time, putting together puzzles and reading, that it was the perfect time to share with parents and children and Shakespeare lovers your lovingly and wonderfully written book. So thank you for saying yes instantly when Emily reached out to you. And before we talk about the book specifically and your method, I wanted to ask you to talk about your own personal experience with and relationship to Shakespeare's plays. And so I sort of have this series of foundational exposure questions. You can choose whatever you want among the following, but how are you taught or first introduced to the works of Shakespeare? What is your earliest memory of Shakespeare? What role did he play in your schooling? And have you had any formal training or study? I know.
Well,
tell me all.
Was when I was a kid, my parents, years before that, had been to Broadway and seen Richard Burton in Hamlet. And at one point, when I was, I don't know, about 10, my parents bought me the LP album because it was recorded. Richard Burton, the entire Hamlet from soup to nuts on 7 LPs. So I played them and played them and played them to the point that I just memorized so much of it, all the major soliloquies, so much of the rest of it, and just became enamored. And after that, all I wanted to do was be in the theater, and all I wanted to do was study Shakespeare. So I would know I never had any formal training in Shakespeare. I mean, I studied in college with a wonderful professor. When I was in Cambridge for a couple of years, I was exposed to it so much, and from Cambridge went to the RSC, Royal Shakespeare Company, again and again, and saw all their seasons and saw wonderful things. But it became such an obsession with me and such a love that I just read it and started teaching myself long passages and teaching them to my children. So that's sort of where it comes from for me.
How about you, Emily?
Well, I am actually the opposite. I had a father who was a great intellectual, a great American historian, a professor of history, who, when I got the acting bug and the theater bug in high school, said to me, I don't understand Shakespeare. It's written in a foreign language, and I wonder if he really is as great as everyone says he is. And I remember thinking, well, I'd never seen Shakespeare done. And so when I went off to college, I studied it as an English major. Still, it didn't leap off the page. And my sophomore summer, I went off to Europe on a fellowship, and I was going to be writing my first play and going all through Eastern Europe looking for my ancestors' villages, and stopped in London, was with friends who took me to meet Sam Wanamaker, who was at that point in time trying to start what would become the Bankside Globe Theater. It was a tent that he'd put up on the Thames at this point. He was doing Antony and Cleopatra that summer with Vanessa Redgrave. Tony Richardson, the great Tony Richardson, who had just directed Tom Jones, was directing. And I wanted at that point in my life to be a director, but I didn't know how you approach Shakespeare. And I asked if I could assist Tony Richardson. And he found, only when you're 18, 19 years old, do you have the chutzpah to do this. So I asked, and he said, well, I told him I don't have any money for an assistant. I just got off the phone with him. Will you do it for free? And I said, well, I'll do it if I get one meal a day. He said, all right, we'll give you lunch. And I was hired and off I went. So the first time I got to understand what Shakespeare was to, which is, I think, perhaps my favorite play, or maybe it's Lear, but Antony and Cleopatra with Vanessa at the Bankside Globe. Julian Glover was playing Antony, who was, okay. But Vanessa, first day of rehearsal, she was off book. That means that she wasn't looking at the book, for those of you who are not in the theater. She had memorized the entire thing. She put it aside and started to become Cleopatra at the table. And it was almost if by the time she got to I Dreamed There Was an Emperor Antony speech, it was as if she were levitating. She was just astounding to watch work. And then you saw all the other actors going, well, I know what I'll be doing tonight. I'm going to learn all my lines and catch up. She set the bar this high. And so I sat there and absorbed like a sponge all of it. And suddenly I had no problem understanding what anyone said ever. We went through the script, and it was how you took apart the text and how you learned how to scan it so that you could understand yourself what you were saying, so that you could then, if you understood it, the audience would understand it. Suddenly it became crystal clear. And of course, most of the actors who were in that company had been trained at some of the finest British acting schools, and they were trained in this. And so it came alive for me, and I was hooked for life.
So Antony and Cleopatra, did you say is your favorite?
Well, one of them. I mean, it's hard for me. I would say, Lear, which I've never directed. Antony and Cleopatra, which I have directed. Scottish play, Macbeth, which I have directed. Midsummer and As You Like It are my 5 favorites.
That's a quarter of the canon.
It's not Ken, good at saying favorites, is it?
It's hard. Ken,
it's hard.
Do you have a favorite? How about this for Ken? What's your favorite play? And do you have a favorite character? And the favorite character doesn't need to be from the same play.
I have a favorite play, but I can't say one favorite play. I'm sorry, I'm with Emily. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. But it's Midsummer Night's Dream is the most extraordinary thing I think ever written. It's just amazing. And the first third of my book is about Midsummer Night's Dream because I love it so much. But then all the great high comedies. He wrote early on, he wrote a couple comedies that aren't so great. Comedy of Errors is so-so, and Two Gentlemen in Verona is mock nixed, is just hard to get through. But when he got into his stride and he started the early great ones were Taming of the Shrew and Midsummer. But then when he got into the same time in that 15, Jim Shapiro's, I know Jim Shapiro, we were on the board of governors of the Shakespeare Library together for 10 years. So I know Jim very well. And his book before 1606 was called 1599. Mm-hmm. And that's the period of Shakespeare writing all the great comedies in that sort of era, just before and after. And that's Twelfth Night, As You Like It, and Much Ado About Nothing are called the high comedies. So if you pair those 3 high comedies with Midsummer Night's Dream, you've got the 4 greatest comedies ever written. Favorite character, probably either Oberon from Midsummer Night's Dream, which is one of the speeches I'll talk about later, one of his speeches, but maybe Falstaff or Rosalind, because Falstaff and Rosalind are the greatest speakers in all of Shakespeare. Nobody speaks the way they do. Bloom's invention of Shakespeare and the invention of the human, he feels the same way, that nobody speaks like Rosalind and Falstaff, and it's true.
So Ken, a follow-up question to that. This comes from Jack McFarland from Skillman, New Jersey, who's on the call with us. If you could play one scene, not necessarily the role in the entire play, what would it be?
It would be Act 2, Scene 1 of Midsummer Night's Dream, which is the scene where we go into fairyland. It opens with Puck meeting another fairy and saying, you know, my master Oberon is so mad at your mistress Titania, and talks about these two huge characters who are the king and queen of the fairies, and then they come on with this enormous argument filled with jealousy. Titania, that's one of her great speeches, says, these are the four, when he says, you have committed adultery with such and such a character. And Shakespeare, not caring about details in this world, by the way, having them say, well, you were unfaithful with Theseus and Hippolyta. Well, Theseus and Hippolyta are full-size people. The fairies in Midsummer Night's Dream can fit into acorn cups. That's what they say. So how they committed adultery with each other, I don't quite understand, but neither did Shakespeare, and Shakespeare didn't care. So this is the scene that opens into the fairyland. They have this fight, and she says, these are the forgeries of jealousy. You're lying to me. You know, of course you committed adultery. These are the forgeries of jealousy, and never since the middle summer spring met we in hill and dale, forest or mead, by pavy fountain or by rushy brook, or in the beached margin of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind. Now listen to this. But with thy brawls, thou hast disturbed our sport. So she ends it by saying, but with thy brawls, you started it all. Now, doesn't that sound like every couple you've ever met?
So wait, Ken, would you play Titania or Oberon in that?
I'd
scene?
play Oberon just because I know the part better. And
Okay.
but it's all, I'll tell you, it's self-serving because it's a much longer part. And it's longer because after Titania storms off, he has then an incredible scene with Puck. Then the lovers come on, he watches them while he's invisible, and has another incredible scene with Puck. So the scene is Oberon's, and it's just remarkable.
Thank you for that. I think you've just so excited the students from the Shakespeare Kids Reading Group that everybody's going to do Oberon's monologue. Although that's also the scene, students, where Titania's challenge monologue is. So look for that one. Emily, Jane Gutman from Falls Church, Virginia asks, which of Shakespeare's plays do you think is the most difficult to stage?
Ooh. Well, none of them is easy. Let's put it that way. Lear is really tough. Really, really tough. And part of it has to do with the whole section on the heath, with the, you know, the dark night of the soul, the thunder and the lightning, and then going into the hut and finding poor Tom, and all of that's very rarely done well. And also the blinding, and there's just a lot of extraordinary challenges for any director to handle. But it's also one of the reasons I'm dying to do it. Still haven't done it. I was hoping I would do it before I left McCarter, but I will do it someday. I think it might be Lear. What do you think, Ken? I think it's a really hard play to stage well.
I think it is really hard. I think the too hard, in the world of comedies, I think the really hard play to do is Twelfth Night.
Twelfth Night,
because you have the cross-dressing. Let me say that I think the two greatest comic scenes ever written, for those who are listening, are Midsummer Act 2, Scene 1, and Twelfth Night, Act 1, Scene 5, when Viola goes to meet Olivia the first time. And it's hard because with Twelfth Night, because you're balancing, there's that balance of when does Olivia ever know that that's a woman? The delicate balance, it's hard in a different way.
Yeah.
Lear is so enormous and titanic, but you know, Twelfth Night and Midsummer, but Twelfth Night in its own funny way is the essence of comedy. It's probably the greatest single work I think ever written.
Ken, it so surprises me that you never really did much acting, because you so embody what you're talking about with such passion.
Well, I acted in high school, and if you missed that, I feel sorry for you.
Any Shakespeare?
No, I never did Shakespeare on stage. I'd have loved to. And I played Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady. And it was said in Pennsylvania that I was the best Henry Higgins since Rex Harrison. Now, this was said only by my mother, but it was said. So it was fun. I directed a lot in college. Yeah.
Marilyn.
And I directed since college. Yeah.
Marilyn Shannock from Burlington Township, New Jersey, asks the both of you, do you prefer Shakespeare set in his own time or updated?
Go ahead, Ken.
Well, I'm not a traditionalist of feeling it has to be set in its own time. But I do worry about some of the productions I see. I'll tell you what I worry about. It's not really a question of when it's set, it's the integrity with which it's set. I've recently seen in this my community in DC some Shakespeares that they bend over backwards to say, oh, we're going to be cool or relevant, or people are going to understand it. And so they misuse the play and they bend it into ways that are really not true to the spirit of Shakespeare. Because if you do Shakespeare well and really you can make it so clear and so clean that nobody's confused. You don't need to prove that with odd modern costumes, but it doesn't matter. If you want to do it modern, but just be true to the work.
I think that's right. And in fact, the thing that I like the best is when it's stripped to the bone, and it really is about the essence of the play and what the actors are doing. I mean, when you think about it, you don't need sets for Shakespeare. Right. He didn't have sets. He painted the scenery with words. You don't need any of that. They all did it in their contemporary dress. You can do it in ours, just so long as it doesn't get in the way. So you're dealing all the time with anachronisms. I hate when there's people are talking about being stabbed, but they've been shot, or right. Or someone has to come on with a cell phone, and all that. Just for me, it takes me out of the play. But I'm not a traditionalist. I'm rather a quiet radical usually. But to me, the most radical way to do it is to really do the play, which means
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely,
rip it right to its essence.
Yep.
And you can wear clown costumes if that's what it's about. I mean, actually, the most wonderful Midsummer I ever saw was Peter Brook's. Did you ever see it, Ken?
I did. I saw it twice.
Oh my God!
That's what changed. That's really what changed my life.
Me too.
Me life.
Too.
Yeah.
Me
too. Can you describe the essence of Peter Brook's production of Midsummer for those who haven't seen it?
And it was never recorded either. By the way, you can't ever see it. Go ahead, Emily. You go ahead.
Well, it was stripped again. It was stripped to the bone. It was in a white box.
Right.
It was almost like a squash court because you had something up above and below, no other things. And then there were sort of circus things. There were trapezes and ropes, and all the rest was the actors, basically.
And just use great imagination. It wasn't set in any one particular time.
Right. And it was all everyone was in just very simple, they were almost acrobatic or clown costumes, very simple, almost sort of Chinese cut jackets and pants, so that they were free to work. And it was very physical. The lovers were running after each other and jumping on each other, and the the fairies were flying through the air with the trapezes and all that, but it was very simple. And all about, as Ken says, imagination. And that was the first time we all knew that you didn't need scenery. You didn't need to have something that was old-fashioned scenography. That is saying, oh, well, this is a throne and this is where you are in space, and it's the forest, or here it's the court, or here it whatever was used, and it was through the words and how people were speaking to each other and how they were acting that you understood who was who and where you were, and the rest was all in your imagination. And it was so liberating for so many of us in the theater at that time to let go of all the old-fashioned 50s heavy sets and all that. And really, yeah, go ahead.
What was breathtaking about it that changed our lives was exactly what Emily's saying, is that it wasn't that you needed any set. He could have just done it in plain set and street clothes and done the same thing in a way, but it was text. It was text. It was text. We heard everything. We understood everything. And it was done with such great passion. So if you look back at the John Gielgud movies and the Olivier movies and all, they're melodramas. They're overly acted. Oh, they're showing their passion. But this wasn't. They'd look at each other and they'd speak in very real terms. And, Oberon would look in Puck's eyes and say, "My gentle Puck, come hither." I mean, just come to me.
Just spoke to each other. Right. They were not
changed our lives.
Yeah. And the other one was Brooks Lear. And that was done like it was a Beckett play. I mean, it was just stripped down, and it was just barren, and you had a rock and you had brambles. And then at one point you had, a simple throne, and then it was gone and there was nothing left of that world. And again, just shattering in its simplicity. And it was text, and deeply, deeply felt.
Right, deeply felt is exactly right. Yep.
So I'm about to segue into talking about how to teach your children Shakespeare and what inspired you to write it, Ken. But I sort of want to end this segment by posing the question offered by Rupa Patel of West Windsor, New Jersey. She's also a beloved member of the McCarter family, as previously been in the community ensemble for our production of A Christmas Carol. So Rupa asks, what is it about Shakespeare's work that resonates with readers and educators and clearly audiences after 400 plus years?
Ken, you want to take it? It's such a good question.
So say it again, Paul. What resonates?
What is it about his work that resonates with readers and educators after all this time? Happy birthday, Shakespeare, by the way.
Yesterday, yeah. Well, I think it's because, and that actually is great because I was going to say something about why he speaks to us today, and I think he speaks to us today, for me, in two different ways, 100 different ways, because he's limitless. He is everything. But he gives us a sense of hope in even the bleakest of his plays, even Lear. We get a sense of hope at the end. And I have a wonderful quotation here from one of my favorite authors, which is Northrop Frye, who wrote Anatomy of Criticism, and he also wrote a book. One of my favorites is his book called A Natural Perspective, The Development of Shakespearean Comedy and Romance. And he says that the genius of Shakespeare's romances, and he's talking about the final romances, the last four plays, Cymbeline, Winter's Tale, Pericles, and Tempest, that the genius of Shakespeare's romances lies in recognizing how extravagantly life can go wrong and yet be righted. How extravagantly life can go wrong and yet be righted. And that, if there's any time in our lives that we want that sense of belief in hope, this is it. And that's what happens in the romances. People are torn from pillar to post. The most awful things happen. But through some magical spirit of the human, something about the human spirit that
Mhm.
pulls us through. And that's how he speaks to us universally. The other thing he does is he gives us a great perspective. And since we're going to go to the book, this is one of the passages I use in the book. And it's one you won't expect me to use in a way. It's from As You Like It. It's one of your favorites, Emily. And
Yeah.
it's when this occurs when, Duke Senior has been banished from the court by his evil brother, and he's living with a group of people in the forest. They eat what they can get from the forest, but their spirit is unbroken. Their spirit is unbroken, and into the camp, they're sitting around about to sing a song and have one of their meals, and into the camp runs a man with a sword, and it's Orlando, the hero of the romance plot. And he says, "Stop eating. Don't eat another bite, because I've got an old man with me. I just carried from court," because he also had to flee the court because of this evil man at the center of the court. "I don't eat anything until this old man eats." And they say, "No." Duke Senior says, "Wait, you don't have to yell at us. You don't have to argue with us. We're in sympathy. We don't want to eat until you bring him to camp." And Duke Senior says, and then Orlando runs off to get old Adam, his old servant, who he's saving, whose life he is saving. And Duke Senior says to his band of friends, including one of whom is Jaques, here's the quote. It's just 4 lines. "Thou seest we are not all alone unhappy. This wide and universal theater presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play on. The world is filled with, we can't feel sorry for ourselves. The world," and that's the line. Those are the lines that kick into Jaques starting, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players." So Shakespeare sets it up with the beauty of those 4 lines, the prose. "Thou seest we are not all alone unhappy. This wide and universal theater presents more woeful pageants than the scene wherein we play on." So as we gather and we bewail our fate in this time of crisis, we need a bigger, broader perspective, the kind that Shakespeare had, that we said, others are suffering even more than we are. And we've got to be thankful for what we have. And he says it in 4 lines. And then comes Jaques, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players." And he goes through the 7 ages of man. So that's how Shakespeare speaks to us in a time of crisis like this.
Mhm.
Thanks for that, Ken.
Beautiful.
I got the chills. Hey, I want to let folks that are attending, and we have 100 people with us. So glad that you're here. That if you want to throw some either comments or questions into the Q&A, I still have lots of questions, but I do want to segue into the book. But I just also want people to have the opportunity to make comments. Ken, the dedication page of your book reads, and I'm going to hold it up for folks to see. Can they see that? Yes. It says, "This book is dedicated to my children, Olivia and Jack Ludwig, who inspired it." Olivia's on the line. Could you tell us the story of how the book came to be?
Well, the book came to be because my daughter, Olivia, came home from 1st grade one day and said, "Oh, Dad, I know a bank where the wild thyme blows." I started to jump back and I said, "That's terrific. That's a line from Shakespeare." And she's 6 years old. Well, her teacher at school in 1st grade taught them 4 lines of Shakespeare. And a light bulb went off in my head. And I thought, well, wait, what a wonderful opportunity. I'd never thought of this. But, kids at 6 years old are sponges. Um, learning Shakespeare will be a bit like learning nursery rhymes for them. So we sat down, snuggled up in bed. What a great excuse to snuggle down with your son and daughter. And I started teaching them passages from Shakespeare little by little by little, until the point got to be when my daughter went away to college, she knew over 1,000 lines of Shakespeare. It could just rattle them off. And it seemed to me such a gift to give my kid. The greatest gift I could give my kids was to learn Shakespeare. Fast forward to about, after I started with them, about 15 years later, and I'm on with a book agent and at William Morris Agency, and the agent says, I was trying to help a friend of mine who had a novel he wanted published. So I'm with William Morris, my theater agent, Jonathan Loma, is there, but I was talking to I think one of the greatest book agents in the entire world, and said, my friend has this novel, he's interested, are you interested? And he said, well, no, I'm not. He said, but what book have you written? And I said, well, I haven't written any books, I write plays. He said, I don't believe you. Look around your study. I'll bet you there's a pile of papers there and you've started a book. And I looked around, and yes, indeed, I'd written about the first 50 pages of How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare, and then thought, well, nobody's going to want to read it. And I'd put it aside for a year or two. And he said, send it to me. And I said, well, all right, but you won't want it. So I said, he took it around to publishers. There was everybody wanted it, thank God. It was an auction, and it ended up being published by Penguin Random House, and it was a bestseller, and I was thrilled, because what it does, and what the book does, is it does exactly, it teaches parents how to do with their kids exactly what I did with Olivia and Jack, which is to teach them short passages from Shakespeare and memorize them. That's the trick. That's the trick. Because just what Emily said a few minutes ago, she said, her dad said to her, wait, I don't even understand the language. It's in a foreign language. And Shakespeare, when you start to read it, seems, or hear it in theater if it's a bad production, sounds like a foreign language. I don't understand that word. I don't understand the way that sentence is constructed. He always puts the verbs ahead of the nouns. The way to conquer it is start with a short passage with a young child, and make sure they understand every word and exactly what it says, because then it's no longer frightening. And the stealth title of this book is How to Teach Yourself Shakespeare, because most people are frightened of Shakespeare to this day. So the first passage, for example, in the book, and here's the easiest one, and it starts with the easiest one, is the one my daughter came home spouting, which is, I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where ox slips and the nodding violet grows, quite over canopied with, by the way, this is Oberon. And what so I tell my kid, look, what he's saying is, I know where Titania sleeps, because I'm going to want you to put some magic juice in her eye. You've got to go find her. So he's describing where his queen sleeps among all these beautiful flowers. So that's all the passage is about. I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, is the first line. So I said to my kids, what's a bank? I know a bank. Well, it's like a part of a meadow. It's green grass that goes down to a little rivulet. It's grass. It's a place to sit. I know a bank where the wild thyme blows. Thyme. Well, thyme is spelled in the Shakespeare, T-H-Y-M-E. Meaning it's a flower that produces a delicious herb we all know, thyme, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. But let's think about Shakespeare for a second. What is Shakespeare always doing? He's always playing with words. And Oberon is describing where the queen of the fairies sleeps. So I know a bank where the wild thyme blows. Maybe he just means to imply also T-I-M-E. where time, as in Peter Pan, never ends, where the time is magical. So I know a bank where the wild time blows, where, and then he starts naming flowers, where ox slips and the nodding violet grows. Well, why are violets nodding? They're nodding. Maybe they're nodding because she's the queen of the fairies. You know, they're nodding in the wind, maybe in the breeze, but maybe they're also nodding in obeisance to their queen. So I know a bank where the wild time blows, where ox slips and the nodding violet grows, quite over canopied with luscious woodbine, another flower, and sweet musk roses end with eglantine. There sleeps Titania, sometime of the night, lulled in these flowers with dances and delight. You hear it. There's almost nothing to explain in all that. We understand it. There sleeps Titania, sometime of the night. It's an odd locution, sometime of the night. She's a creature of the night. There sleeps Titania, sometime of the night, lulled in these flowers with dances and delight. And there the snake sheds her something skin. Enameled, thank you. There the snake sheds her enameled skin, weed wide enough to wrap a fairy in. Well, you have to explain to your child, snakes actually do shed their skins as part of their life cycle, and then they grow a new skin. So the snake, and snakes wouldn't have been that big, they'd have been talking about garden snakes, or even a little longer, say 2-foot snake. It sheds its skin, and he says it's wide enough to wrap a fairy, and a fairy can use that skin as a blanket. So that reminds us again, these are very small creatures. And then he says, and with the juice of this, which is the special magic potion, I'll streak her eyes and make her full of hateful fantasies. This wants her to go to sleep. This magic flower will make her wake up and fall in love with the first creature that it sees. So when you explain it slowly like that and take it one line at a time, so we'd go, okay, Olivia, I know a bank where the wild time blows, where the wild time blows. And then we'd say the entire line, I know a bank where the wild time blows. And she'd repeat it, I know a bank where the wild time blows, where ox.
Emily is acting as your Olivia right there.
She is, and it's great. I can see her.
It's impossible not to repeat after you, Ken.
It's true.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
And it's so beautiful.
It's so contagious, that enthusiasm, and also your mind is just full of, you can see it and you can smell it.
Right.
I mean, it's so fragrant and luscious and beautiful, and the innocence of it is so great. And then it ends with that hateful fantasy.
Hateful fantasies, because what he wants to do is get revenge on his queen. So that's the method in it. The method is very simple, and it was just developed because my daughter and I were sitting on the bed trying to do something together, and it was wonderful to do. So we sat and I would think of what are my favorite passages. And the first 10 or so passages we did together were all from Midsummer Night's Dream, because it seemed to me that's the most accessible for children. There's a fairyland that's beautiful and fun and filled with characters and donkeys, and it's got 4 lovers. So while Midsummer Night's Dream has 4 separate plots, each one is very simple and easy to follow, and Shakespeare's genius is how he interweaves those 4 plots in the course of the play. It's sheer genius, and yet it's very accessible. So make sure you know what every word means, make sure you know what every 4 lines mean together, and then repeat and repeat. And as they memorize short and then longer passages, Shakespeare becomes part of them. It gets in their bones, and they never forget it.
Ken, do you have a specific edition that you would suggest? One of our, I know that Sherry Bobish, Princeton, asked that question, because they're not all created equally. They don't all have notes necessarily to unlock sort of the language. What
my editions? Well,
What edition
Shakespeare.
of Shakespeare?
Oh, what edition of Shakespeare? I'll tell you, there's two great editions that I love most. One is the Folger Shakespeare Library editions, and those are great for students because they're edited by my dear friend Barbara Mowat, who I also dedicated the book to. Head of and she edited these editions over her lifetime with her dearest friend, and they became a very standard edition. And what's cool, I wish I had one handy, I didn't think we'd be talking about it, but what's cool about them is that you open it and the text is on one side and the notes are on the other, meaning the explanation of what the words are. And that's tremendously handy. You don't have to look at the bottom at little footnotes or go to the back of the book to find things. Right there, if you're stuck on a word, you just look to the left and there's the word. So that's part of the genius of Barbara's edition. It's for young families, it's for everyone. I use it to this day. The more complex edition, the great one that has more notes at the bottom that will get you into and have great introductions, are the Arden Shakespeares, and I would use those.
That's great. Ken, I forget what age you said Olivia was when
6.
she was. Okay, so she was 6. So that was a question submitted by Ilana Braun from Brooklyn. What would be the earliest age to begin? And you've already answered which plays.
6 is just right. Yeah.
And you suggest using, in a sense, the original text, not an abridged text per se, and just starting with individual speeches as are laid out in your book.
That's exactly right. Just take the original text. What's wonderful also about the Folger Shakespeare editions is they're very inexpensive. You know, $4.95, $4.95. You can also get them online for the same kind of price. And have the book, the physical book in your hand, very important, of the Shakespeare edition of, say, Midsummer Night's Dream, the Folger edition. But then when you go to the book, it says, okay, passage 1 to learn was I Know a Bank Where the Wild Thyme Blows. The second passage is another passage from Shakespeare. I think the second, well, this is the fourth passage, is when Theseus and Hippolyta at the beginning, he says, now fair Hippolyta, our nuptial hour draws on apace. Nuptial means wedding. So now our wedding, it will be soon when the new moon comes in. So that's another easy passage. And little by little, they get harder. So get a copy of Midsummer Night's Dream, a nice accessible one like the Folger or the Arden. And then go to the book and just teach these passages in this order. And after those 10 passages of Midsummer, they'll be very adept at learning Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And for adult readers, just so they know, there's such joy in reading your takes on the scenes, and also you educate us about meter and the like. So there's a lot. It's not just for kids. I also want to add for folks that decide that they want to engage in this, you also have a website that offers some of your texts, which are easy to read. And I just want to share the screen of that so folks can see that. Let me start just to.
And they're also, right.
Yeah,
right.
go ahead, Ken.
They're on a website. Yep.
Here's the website for everyone to see. And if you scroll down, you'll see their downloads and there are a few things, but you can also just access the passage, which is easy. There's nothing overwhelming.
And notice you've got that on the screen right now. And notice that what I would do, I have notebooks upstairs with the ones I taught the kids, which was, okay, there's the very first one, is I would type them in large font and do them in Comic Sans. So they were an easy one in bold, and I'd split it up. So there you see, I know a bank. I know a bank. You just learn, and then you learn the second half of that line, where the wild thyme blows, where ox lips, and having the speeches typed up and printed in that sort of form makes them very accessible to the kids. So it doesn't look overpowering. And then I got lucky. I called up, here's great name dropping 101. I called up a friend of mine, Derek Jacoby, and his husband, Richard Clifford, who were dear friends. And I said, would you do me a favor? I know this is an imposition, but would you take a mic? You have a microphone at home and live in London, and would you put the microphone down and would you read the this took a lot of chutzpah. I said, would you read the passages from the book, because they're about to publish it, and it would be great to put it on their website so people could hear you guys reading it. And so they said, sure, we'll be happy to. But then the next thing I hear is Random House has said, no, we won't get good enough sound quality that way. That's no good. You have to go down into London and we'll send a car for you and go to a studio and record them in a studio. So it took their whole day. And then the day before they're about to do it, they said, well, some of these are female voices. We don't really want to necessarily do those. We can do some of them, but do you mind if we ask one of our friends, Frances Barber, to come with us? Well, Frances, of course, has played Cleopatra, and she's one of the greatest artists in the whole world. And so the three of them read the passages from the book. If you go to the website of the book, you'll hear the three of them read the passages.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, fantastic.
Stunning.
Hey, let's name drop again. John Lithgow wrote the introduction, and Emily, you'll talk about John's father and the connection.
Yes, well, John actually grew up on the McCarter stage because his father, Arthur Lithgow, was the artistic director of McCarter Theater in the 60s and started the education program, by the way, Paula.
Our student matinee series is named after him.
Yes, it is. And John really started like Ken, he fell in love with Shakespeare at an early age, and he writes about it in the introduction to Ken's book, one of the most beautiful introductions I can imagine. Oh, it's lovely how he captures the excitement of the book.
If I may quote from him, he says, "It has an extraordinary hidden virtue. It is equally informative, readable, and fun for adults."
That's right.
And it's
Yay,
true.
John.
Yay, John.
How to teach yourself Shakespeare. It's true. And then it opens up such a beautiful world. The question of why has he lasted 400 years? I mean, as Ken said, he's bottomless, he's limitless. At every different stage of my life, when I go back to one of the great Shakespeare plays, I see it differently and I learn more, and there are many more layers that come to me. But he understood the human heart, male and female, in all its dimensions. He understood the fluidity of gender. Before this was talked about in modern terms, he understood fun and joy and innocence, as well as pain, and he put them together. He knew that an audience couldn't deal and live through a play like Macbeth without having the Porter scene. That, there he is, yes, he's opening the gates of hell on the one hand, but you roar with laughter when that scene happens right in the middle of one of the greatest, darkest tragedies he ever wrote. It's just an unendingly beautiful experience to live inside of Shakespeare's plays. And whenever I'm low, that's what I do.
We're pretty much at time, but I'd love to privilege two questions from students from the Shakespeare Kids Reading Group. Anjali asks, when doing Shakespeare, the actors may relate to the character, but how do we as actors truly invoke catharsis in an audience?
Emily, that's you. You're the the director.
You just keep telling the truth every step of the way. You find out what every word means and what it all says. And if you're dealing with a great writer like Shakespeare, he'll take you, and catharsis will happen through the truth of your experiencing it. And then the audience has it, not you. You give them the truth and they'll have it. If the writer is as brilliant as our Shakespeare.
Thank you for that. I know Alex Maranzoli had a couple of questions. I'm trying to decide. I'm going to ask this one. Alex is wondering, what opportunities would you both suggest for middle and high school students to perform Shakespeare?
Well, when we have our education programs going, that week you can do it after school at McCarter. And actually, we would love to have younger people into our community reading, wouldn't we?
Oh,
Paula?
absolutely. And let me
I would
just
love that.
say, there's no experience necessary. Alex and Anjali and Ava and Conrad already have experience, but
Oh,
no
yes.
experience necessary. And even that we like to say of Shakespeare Community Reading Group that they're no experts. Technically, there are some people that are expert, but we say we pour our knowledge and our love of Shakespeare into our own personal readings. And in all honesty, to the two of you, well, to the whole audience, the students that are participating in our midsummer Shakespeare Kids Reading Group are reading on par with the adult version. So
Oh, I'm not surprised.
Not
Mhm.
surprised.
and I
Let
encourage.
me, Paula, let me add for people who are around the country that programs like the McCarters, which I've seen and participated in, which is amazing, exists, of course, at all the great theaters in America to help kids learn how to get on stage and do Shakespeare. So here in our community in Washington, two specifically geared to Shakespeare are the Folger Shakespeare Theater, which is part of the library, does an incredible a job of introducing kids to Shakespeare, and they have Shakespeare classes in the summer, and so does the Shakespeare Theater, which are they're two separate Shakespeare companies, and they also have an incredible program for kids. So wherever you are in the United States, I bet you might have an opportunity to expose your kids that way.
And although I haven't looked to see on their websites, I know so many of our colleague organizations are trying to find ways to continue student classes virtually. So folks should definitely go to the websites of organizations in their area and see what they have to offer as we move through this current crisis and hopefully get past it. I want to close by reading a note, Ken, to you that came in from an attendee, actually a Margaret Powers, who previously lived in Princeton and was a McCarter subscriber. And when she heard about today's event with you and Emily, she wrote me from Switzerland. And in her note, she wrote, "I'm writing because I took my now 13-year-old to your production of The Hound of the Baskervilles," which is actually your play Baskerville, a number of years ago. Fabulous show, by the way. My son will still repeat the Grimpen-Meyer line as it was delivered in the play for fun. She says, "At intermission, my son requested that we purchase the book, How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare. We read it together and it launched his love of Shakespeare. He has since read A Midsummer Night's Dream, Macbeth, and Hamlet, and attended that production of yours a couple of years ago." I'm thinking that might have been our Hamlet that we did with, why am I blanking on our group? Who did we do Hamlet with?
Bedlam.
Bedlam. Thank you. Sorry, Bedlam. I love you. She continues, "I'm grateful to that book, and in fact, brought it with us to Switzerland. I just brought it out for my middle son last week, and he has started memorizing the stanzas in the first 5 chapters."
Oh, great.
So further proof that this may be a wonderful delight and a way to pass the time and be together as children and their family and their parents are during this time. I just want to mention before we close entirely that, again, Princeton, New Jersey's bookseller Labyrinth Books, they're stocking copies of Ken's How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare. You can call and order a copy. If you call, free shipping in the continental US. If you live locally, you can also arrange for curbside pickup. So regardless of where you live, please support your local bookseller. And we thank Dorothea and the folks from Labyrinth for their partnership. Also, can I note, if you've never visited Ken's website, kenludwig.com, it's a great website. You can, if you don't already know all about his amazing body of work, you can discover it there. He also has a great blog that is full of wonderful essays, and I really suggest to people that they visit. I throw it back to you, Emily and Ken, before I give note on the upcoming Shakespeare Community Reading Group. Any final words?
I love to be with Ken Ludwig. He just gets me so happy and so excited about being a part of the theater. And I just love our collaboration and I love our times together. So thank you, Ken. Thanks for doing this.
Well, it's an absolute vice versa. Ever since we got together on Baskerville, we've become absolutely best friends, best buddies. Emily directed my last play I had at the McCarter, Murder on the Orient Express, and I've asked her to direct my next play. So she said yes, but I'm saying this publicly, not to put any pressure on you, Emily, but you've committed now. So as soon as
I have, there are witnesses, yes.
There's now witnesses, and as soon as it's going to be at the Cleveland Playhouse and the Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park, it's called Moriarty. It's a successor sort of to Baskerville.
What?
Very romantic and and full of fun and action, and so please come and see Emily's incredible work.
I think you just broke news right here.
We did.
We
just broke news. That's true.
That's
breaking news.
Hey, so everyone, thank you so much for attending McCarter Theater Center at Home. We'll continue. We'll reach out with programming every Monday. We share out information of upcoming education classes, virtual community play readings like this Tuesday's Shakespeare Community Reading Group reading. That's April 28th at 7 p.m. of The Comedy of Errors. There's a link on the McCarter website that will take you there. We're going to read the first half of the play. We also have live artists in conversation events. We have a lineup coming up of some wonderful guests who will be in conversation with Emily. We have behind the scenes interviews and archival footage from some of your favorite past productions, and we'll suggest fun at home activities and hopefully inspire your own art making. As soon as you sign out of this event or we close the Zoom room, you should be taken to the McCarter website where you can sign up for McCarter at Home announcements if you already aren't. Just a reminder, after The Comedy of Errors, the play that we will read is going to be The Tragedy of King Lear. You might want to grab a copy of James Shapiro's The Last Year of Lear as well for that contextualization that he will provide. Emily and Ken, thanks so much. This was great fun. And
thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. Always a pleasure.
Great to see you again.
All right. Please take care of yourselves, and everyone out there, please stay safe, flatten the curve, and our best to you. Cheerio.
Hello. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.